So everybody's favorite friendly neighborhood Spider-Man has been doing more than just help the people of New York City. He's also been spinning his webs to try and prop up the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because even as I think the MCU has really struggled to rediscover sort of its once solid footing, the Spider-Man films have been, I think, a consistent bright spot. And now back with a slightly darker and more mature story. Can Spider-Man Brand New Day once again push the MCU back into the right direction? I have seen it, so let's talk about it. So as many of you guys know, I've been pretty burnt out by the MCU and really just most of the comic book movies that have been released in the last 4 or 5 years. But the one sort of Marvel movie series that I do still feel some level of sort of emotional investment in is the Spider-Man movies. So even more than something like Avengers Doomsday later this year, I have been looking forward to this movie. And I've got to say, I really did enjoy it. Spider-Man Brand New Day may not be the most fun Spider-Man adventure, but it is arguably the best, or at least I think the most meaningful. I think by foregoing cosmic threats and the endless multiverses in favor of much more personal stakes, Spider-Man Brand New Day is a mature and emotional story that is about more battling loneliness than it is interdimensional villains. I think in a film that does recapture the magic of the early MCU and inspires a bit more hope for its future. And to me, a central problem of sort of the later phases of the MCU is that they have felt more like they're about expanding the world or introducing more lore from the comics than they are in simply exploring deeply into the characters. So I appreciate that Spider-Man Brand New Day takes a refreshing sort of less is more approach. The entire film actually takes place within New York City, which I just think is a great decision. I think the stakes are not really to save the world at large, but rather to protect the loved ones in Peter Parker's more immediate world. And I think largely because of its more sort of narrow focus, it's a film that has something meaningful to say, and I think does so in ways that are both highly entertaining and at times actually quite moving. Tom Holland is excellent, I think, once again, in perhaps his most demanding and dramatic role yet. And actually, with this film's release, he has now headlined more movies as Spider-Man than either Tobey Maguire or Andrew Garfield did. And making his sort of first MCU appearance way back when he was still a teenager, both the actor and the character have essentially grown up on the screen. I think which does add another dimension to this film specifically, and it's the theme about kind of maturing and learning to embrace the difficult changes that come with growing up. I think it is a personal story that just feels well earned at this point in the journey, both as a character and as an audience. On the other side of the conflict, the film's villain, who really wasn't featured in much or any of the trailers, so I won't spoil anything here, but I think they are among Marvel's most interesting and compelling villains, in part due to a really excellent acting performance. The character also provides some very exciting implications for the future of the MCU, which I know a lot of fans will enjoy. But to me, what makes Brand New Day, I think, really effective as a film is just a clear sense of purpose and intentionality in the way that the story is woven together. For example, side characters like Bruce Banner, aka the Hulk, and Frank Castle, aka the Punisher, are both fun and they contribute to the film's action spectacle and just connections to the larger MCU. But they also both serve a very important thematic function in Peter Parker's own character journey. As Peter Parker sort of struggles to navigate his growing and changing powers, the two supporting characters essentially represent sort of opposite ends of the spectrum in trying to contain the monster inside each of them, both literally and metaphorically. And just the way those characters are used, I think the film manages to fit clearly into the bigger established MCU world without ever feeling merely in service of it, which is just a balance that I think Marvel has not always achieved. Now, I should make clear too that despite this more sort of mature storytelling and themes, this film is still very much a fun Spider-Man flick. It is directed by Destin Daniel Cretton, who also directed what I think is a very underrated MCU film in Shang-Chi, Legend of the Ten Rings, and it has some of the best sort of this comic book action that I have seen in a while. It's all very, I think, inventive and visually thrilling, but in contrast to a film like the recent Supergirl movie, in which pointless action scenes are inserted every so often, seemingly just because comic book movies need action scenes. The action in this movie always goes beyond just sort of the punching and kicking and web slinging. In fact, I think to remove any of the impressive action sequences from the film would actually remove important story and thematic elements. I think as a result, whether it's emotionally weighty conversation or dramatic scenes, or Spider-Man in an epic battle against a group of cool ninja warriors, the focus is always on the character and furthering the story, which honestly is all I've really been wanting from these comic book movies lately, is just for all the flashy spectacle on screen to actually mean something. Now, I will say not everything works perfectly. The film is a bit too long and does miss some of the levity and this earnest fun of the earlier films, which does make you feel the length even more. The limited scenes shared between characters Peter Parker and his friends MJ and Ned made me realize how important those relationships were to the series, and that dynamic is missed at times here. As a parent, I should also note that the character of Spider-Man has, I think, traditionally had great appeal to younger audiences, but the more serious and sometimes gloomy tone, as well as some possible content concerns, such as a fair amount of profanity, may make it a bit more of a challenge. Now, my own two 11-year-old sons came with me to the movie, and they both loved it, and I don't think there's anything overly concerning content-wise, but I think the more mature material may not be as welcome from my parents' perspective as it is for older viewers. Also, just as a quick PSA, the after credits scene is totally not worth your time, so I suggest just Google it. As far as content to consider, things going on the surface of this, like I said, for language, there is a fair amount of profanity. You have one character who begins to drop a very clear F word before being silenced with a web. And just overall, there is, I think, a higher volume of profanities than is typical in a Marvel movie, mostly due to the inclusion of the character of the Punisher, who is responsible for most of these profanities. But there are just frequent uses of words that begin with S and A and H, and also both God and Jesus' name are frequently used as curses, often with the phrase GD. And I totally get that these aren't necessarily kids movies, but as someone who enjoys taking my kids with me to go see them, I do wish that Marvel would pull back a bit on the language. As far as violence, really nothing shown on screen beyond just the typical comic book bloodless action. In fact, I don't think a single character in this movie actually dies, so nothing concerning for that. For sexuality, perhaps the main thing is there is a scene in which two characters have a meeting while soaking in a pool, where you have the male wearing just a mask and his underwear, and the female who is naked and visible from the shoulders up, although the moment is not necessarily presented with any sort of sexual implications. And also in that scene, a woman asks Spider-Man if he has a girlfriend or perhaps a boyfriend, and then references some seemingly very graphic sort of sexual fan art that she saw online about him, featuring him and a male villain. Beyond that, I will say too, Peter Parker spends multiple scenes in this movie wearing only his underwear, and I suppose it probably is possible to see sort of the visual depiction of Parker's body changing and his development of the organic webs to have some sort of sexual connotations in certain ways. As far as themes, worldview, things going on beneath the surface, I think this film really is just an exploration of what has been called sort of our epidemic of loneliness. The story takes place, as I said, entirely within the busy and sort of highly populated New York City, yet each of the central characters find themselves isolated and alone. After the events of the previous film, Peter Parker has been totally erased from memory, leaving him completely anonymous, which proves to be a more devastating prospect than any of sort of the superpowered bad guys that he has faced off against. And there is just sort of an interesting contrast in which Spider-Man now has sort of more personal human connections in the world than Peter Parker does. He is known, even admired, but he's not truly known. Spider-Man may be the most famous person in New York, but Peter Parker spends his evenings alone in his apartment, eating Little Caesars pizza and looking at his computer screens, just lamenting the happy lives that other people seem to be having. And I think in a way, his superhero mask kind of takes on a deeper symbolic significance. I think it can be seen as a sort of representation of just our own kind of online or manufactured personas, in which we are more widely visible and connected really than any previous generation, while statistically speaking being as lonely and isolated as ever before. And we know in scripture, God promises to never leave or forsake us. At the same time, we were also created with an innate need for just human connection. And you have Jesus who said, wherever two or three gather in my name, there there I am with them. And God is obviously like with one person as much as he is with two or three, but there just seems to be like a special blessing or like purpose that comes when life is lived like within the community as God intended. To be alone is very dehumanizing, and like healing largely comes through relationships, and this film really does show that. And in like a really powerful ending scene, which might be one of my favorite scenes in any Marvel movie, it is ultimately not like the strength and like powers of Spider-Man that is needed to save the day, but rather like the friendship and like empathy of Peter Parker. It's fitting too that like the film's end credits feature a very beautiful sort of visual montage of random regular people in New York engaging in various sort of communal activities. The film just seems to suggest that it is these simple connections more than just sort of superpowered heroes that are truly needed in our world right now. In the end, I think this is a great film. I do think finding sort of a sense of relatable, ordinary life in the now expansive sort of cosmic cinematic universe will always be a bit of like a tricky dance for the MCU. And yet, I think as with like the enjoyable Thunderbolts movie did last year with a very similar story, Spider-Man Brand New Day proves that it is still possible to explore sort of relatable and universal human stakes, even in the middle of a sprawling sort of comic book world. After all, the MCU was built on meaningful stories about relatable heroes, not just cameos and sort of fan service team-ups. Like the bombastic Avengers film, like Doomsday surely will be later this year, may offer sort of the glorious cinematic payoff, but that spectacle is only really as meaningful as the characters like at the center of those stories. Peter Parker may no longer be in high school, but he clearly understood the assignment here, and he just manages to breathe some very much needed life back into the MCU. But hey, I would love to hear what you think. If you're still on board with the MCU, or maybe like me, you need to be pulled back in with a great film, don't be shy, jump into the comment section, let's have a conversation on it. If you haven't done so too, encourage you guys, subscribe to the channel, become a Collider. I got lots of other movie reviews, got our Faith and Pop Culture podcast, got interviews, just other fun stuff. Love to have you guys be a part of that. Most of all, guys, thank you for watching, stay safe, and continue to collide with the world for Christ.